Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me in the back? If you could, raise your hand. Oh, right. I guess we actually have some good audio. Well, I hope everybody got something to eat and drink, and we could continue being merry later. We want to get things rolling today, and first of all, I'd like to thank everybody that's here today. This is just so wonderful to have so many people here that, it would really be funny when the mic stand falls off the stage. Yeah. But it's so good to have everybody here today. And to get things rolling, we'd like to have the colors presented by our friends from Troop 246. And Troop 246 is sponsored by the Moraga Rotary Club, and to present the colors are four of their absolute finest scouts, or the four most available scouts today. I met them outside, and I'm sure proud that Moraga Rotary is sponsoring this troop. What four outstanding young men. If your caller would like to begin, it's your floor. At ease, there we go. I've been wanting to be at ease for a long time. Okay, well, once again, thank you so much to Troop 246. They all just got back from camp and Philmont and all the great adventures that come along with scouting. We're really happy that you were here today, especially since scouting was such a great part of Cliff's life. Well, we're here to honor our friend, our motivator, our educator, our conscience. Yeah, our conscience. Our leader, our inspiration, our court jester, the jokester, you name it. He was our counselor, our barbecuer, our domino, our rummy cube buddy, and he was also our president. And he was our father. And we're here to basically say goodbye one more time. You know, we had a heck of a time getting this thing together today because we had so many different things. You know, the unfortunate course of events with the COVID and people had so many things going on, and we thought we found a great date, but of course the Rotarians are doing wheelchairs in Central America or South America or somewhere south of Texas. They were somewhere. But we had all these great things. You know, one person couldn't come because their dog had a sickness. And so we finally got all the pets healthy. We've got all the projects completed for the time being. And now we could get together and celebrate. You know, generally at events like this, you want to go ahead and introduce all the luminaries that are here in the crowd today. But there are so many, we're just going to introduce the catering staff. But so we'll cut down on that. Today we're going to share some stories. We're going to have a little bit of fun. I don't know if you know this. It's kind of a poorly kept secret, but my father was a Rotarian. And what a Rotarian he was. He always wanted to join Rotary, And the motivating factor to him and his first exposure to Rotary, he was the guy that was the waiter at the Rotary Club of Delaware in Bunn's Restaurant. Yes, Bunn's. And that's, for some of you, that's not a strip joint in Delaware, Ohio. It's an actual restaurant. And so he was part of that, and Rotary became such a big part of his life, the involvement, the fellowship, the friendships, everything that came along with it. It was such an incredible brought such an incredible joy to his life. It added to our family's life. We have extended family here throughout the room. Some of them have aged to the point I don't recognize, but I'm sure that they're family. That was not directed at anybody specific. We're honored to have a couple great speakers today. Our first one is the aide to this year's president and one of Dad's close friends, Brad Howard. And if you could come on up and say a few words on behalf of Rotary.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I mean, I would like to believe that you're starting out awake at least. First of all, Claudia and Cliff, thank you so much for asking me to be a part of this, to honor Cliff, someone that means not only a lot to me, but everyone in this room, and to have a chance to share. On behalf of President Jennifer Jones, who just last evening returned from Bangladesh and is turning around and leaving on Tuesday for Zambia. She couldn't be here because, well, you got to change your clothes somehow in the suitcase, but she sent me to ask on her behalf to send her regards to the family, to send her hello to all of you, and on behalf of her, I do so. I have to say that I got a call inviting me to do this, and it was truly one of the most disconcerting calls I've ever had, because it went to voicemail, and I picked up the voicemail, and it said, "Brad, this is Cliff Dochterman. You're not here." And then as he talked, if you just put in Junior or something, that would have really helped me an awful lot, because it sounded like he came back and it was a lot younger than the last time. I'd like to just take a few moments to share with you a few things, at least of my observations and feelings of Cliff. And I do this to talk about the senses of Cliff, the different types of senses. First, if you're going to use that word around Cliff, the first thing you're going to think of is the sense of humor. And the way that he conveyed that in a casual conversation or from the lectern. In my opinion, there are two standards of people that you look to as orators of our organization. And as someone that grew up in the theater, grew up watching public speaking and being attentive to that, you appreciate their styles. And I will acknowledge one of them that are here, Rick King. Certainly we've watched and listened to Rick over time. And the thing that I have always appreciated of his style of speaking is his cadence and modulation, and the way he can use a pause, pregnant or otherwise. And we've all heard it. He will talk very slowly and then all of a sudden reach a crescendo in whatever he's saying, and then hold you there for a moment. The drama, the emotion, and if you will, the ability to craft a picture with a story are qualities of Rick's public speaking that are worth noting. And then you look at the contrast of Cliff. The thing that always happens when I watch someone who's public speaking is I watch the audience, because they tell the story. And every time that I've ever seen Rick speak or be introduced, if you look at the audience, everyone started to smile. Immediate emotion. And in some ways, what you were watching was your grandfather go up to the lectern, because whatever he said, you were going to love it, even if he scolded you, which he rarely did. We heard it in his speeches. How many times did he use the word friends? And apparently that goes to the generations, because I've already heard it a few times here today. He would take speeches and repeat them and you would want to hear them as if they were anew. The two speeches that of all, and you probably know many of the styles, but the two that we always think of, one well known and one perhaps only seen by a few. If I could be president again, right? We've heard that. If anyone's gone through the ranks of being a governor, you've heard that, 10, 15 times? And yet when he would get back, 10, 15 times, and how many of you bought the video, right? You're watching that again and again. You know the jokes that are coming. The thing that I really liked about that was that Cliff could take a simple joke and make it extraordinary. And I know this because at one of the pets, as I was about to become a governor, people are trying to convey to you messages of, hey, here's how you can get better at speaking. And true story, they handed me a joke book. Now, I don't tell jokes. I find humor in the room because there's a lot of it in Rotary. But it's a joke book. And as I'm thumbing through these jokes, I'm like, Cliff tells that one. Cliff tells that one. And suddenly I'm like, wow, they've been listening to Cliff's speeches. Only to think through that Cliff took these old jokes and made them his own. And they were funnier than anything out of that book. Or I remember a time, and perhaps there's some people in the room, where he was at Pets. There was a new Rotarian that was coming up to receive a pin. Well, those things are kind of small. His fingers were kind of large. That pin and the backing both hit the deck. Everyone on stage went onto all fours. It was only Cliff that turned around and smiled to the audience. Okay, think about that for just one moment. All four, anyway, it's a rough crowd. Good luck, Cliff. It was an absolutely true story of how he turned around and faced us in a way that most times you don't address an audience. The second part was a sense of others. My first time of coming to meet Cliff was with Dorothy at Rick King's district conference. It would have been in the spring of 1983, if I have that right. And I remember first seeing them because I could hear Dorothy's laugh. And I was wondering who was prompting this person to be so loud. And that's how I met Cliff. Because they just giggled together. But it was beyond that. I had a chance to meet him because Rick was the governor. There was another gentleman who followed Rick as the governor, and the person behind that was my father as governor. So I had a chance to meet him. What was extraordinary to me is about a year and a half later in our family's home, I come walking upstairs, and there is Cliff in the living room. And without introduction, he extended his hand and said, "Hi, Brad," which was surprising to me that anyone in a casual meet at a district conference a year plus would have the sense of someone else to be able to do that. But beyond that, how many of you attended the Melbourne Convention in 1991 when the sound went out at the convention while Cliff was on stage? It's the moment that we all fear in public speaking, and yet he put down the microphone, walked to the edge of the stage, sat down, and began to swing his feet. And everyone in that auditorium laughed with him until finally someone walked over with a microphone, handed it to him, and we were back in action. Another time that was outstanding to this of Cliff's sense of others was right after the Mexico City convention. My sister and I, Wendy, and I don't know if Wendy did make it here today, she had another commitment. Wendy and I were down with a tour that we were escorting from the Mexico City convention down to Taxco, Cuernavaca, winding up in Acapulco. And if you've ever been to Taxco, you know it's the silver capital of Mexico, right? Well, right after the convention, the board of directors typically has a meeting. It's the last meeting of the year, the current year, and it's the first meeting of the subsequent year. At that time, Cliff would have been the president nominee. So my sister and I get into Taxco. We tell everybody you have an hour and a half to go spend your money the way you see fit, and then we're going to get back in the bus and off we go. So Wendy and I, in the main Zocalo, the main square of the city, go up to a second floor bar that has a balcony to sit there and just watch the people. And as we're watching the people, up comes a whole caravan of black cars. And out of those cars come what we recognize are the board of directors on their way to some place to have their meeting. But they too will do some shopping. All of a sudden, my sister recognizes Cliff and shouts from the balcony, "Hey, Cliff!" To which he not only waves, but then he proceeds to walk across the square, go up the stairs, sit down with us, and join us in a beer for an hour. That was the type of person that we came to know, somebody that was of those black cars, but was human enough to have a sense of others, or his sense of history. Cliff has educated us all. He's told me the story of how our effort in polio eradication started from the 3H grants and proceeded along, and he was one of the key architects that was in that, the chair of the committee, in fact, that was evaluating the 3H grants. He told the story of how we wound up coming to buy one Rotary Center, our offices there in Evanston. But it was beyond that, as I came to recognize. Our family spent about 26, 7 years going to the Lair of the Bear. Anybody here from the Lair of the Bear? Go Bears. Blue or gold? Gold, thank you. All right, well done. Oski's fair too. It's just that blue cheats. Anyway, we were going up, and I called Cliff, and I said, "Cliff, you told me that you were involved with the Lair of the Bear at one point. Would you be interested in coming up and seeing what the lair looks like now?" He said, "Sure." So he and Mary Elena came up. We put them in a cabin that had indoor plumbing, which was unusual for the lair, but nonetheless. He went into the main gold lodge with us and walked up, and Cliff, on the wall, there were pictures of staff, of every staff since the inception of the lair that started back in 1950. And as we came in, Cliff walked up to the picture that was in the upper left-hand corner and said, "See the guy in the black jacket? Yeah, that's me." Cliff was one of the people that put together the Lair of the Bear, that started it. And what was more remarkable is that the culture and the traditions of the Lair are well embedded. There is the opening night campfire that no one messes with, and yet, knowing Cliff was there, the Cal Alumni Association asked him to speak, of which he did. And all of a sudden, out of the mouth of Cliff came words that didn't use the word Rotary, talking about the Lair as if it was Rotary, with that familiarity, with that sense of humor. And I kid you not, he said, "By the way, is anyone in tent 59? Because I think my Playboy slipped down behind the bed." Honest truth. And that later, the next day, out on the Gold Lodge, which has a big deck, he sat there, and all of the families that were known as the families of the Lair, including a guy by the name of Mike White. If any of you know Mike, he used to be the coach of Cal, Illinois, the Raiders. He sat literally on the ground in front of Cliff to hear his stories. And Cliff, again, told the stories of the Lair in a way that sounded just like Rotary, but without using that word. His sense of purpose. We arguably would talk about the greats of Rotary and include many. Paul Harris, Arch Clumpf, certainly people like Rick, but very few shaped Rotary. Certainly if you were going to think of a shaper, there's no one that I know of or have come to know of that has shaped Rotary more than Cliff, to leave an indelible fingerprint of himself and perhaps even more importantly of me, the individual Rotarian. And yet he took us there. He was the one that navigated a very difficult convention in Copenhagen when it was determined that the person who had been designated as our president did so in a way that was not to our tradition and needed to be replaced. It was an extraordinarily difficult episode to go through, and yet Cliff did it with a sense of humor, with everyone following him, and it was a wonderful place. It was a wonderful expression to watch at a troubling time. But more than that, that sense of purpose carried a lot of us along. He was the one that would sit down with you and give you advice about Rotary, your career path, whether it be becoming a director, becoming a governor, becoming a president, or just becoming more of Rotary. He extended that well beyond it, as we all know. I've spoken about the Lair, but beyond that, even the Moraga Country Club had Cliff's fingerprints all over it to come to pass. So we'll no longer have the opportunity to receive his notes at Christmas that expressed his sense of humor, framed around golf balls for quite some time, or having lunches with him to be able to hear the stories of Rotary, receive his advice. But I think the senses of Cliff live in all of us. The senses of a joke, a smile, a purpose, a place, and of people. For the family, thank you for sharing him with us for so many years. Thank you for allowing us to feel that we are part of your family. For all of you for taking the time to be here. He's not here, but there's one person that I really feel compelled to acknowledge, and that is a gentleman by the name of Bob Warner, a past district governor, that was so important to Cliff and Mary Elena for quite some time from Arkansas, but made the point of becoming a friend and a confidant and offering a lot of support. And to all of you, thank you.
Make things a little easier here. That was just fantastic. And I just really appreciate your thoughts. And gosh, you make me think of so many different things about about my father. It's just, yeah, that's just extraordinary. Thank you. Our next presenter is truly one of the most influential and dynamic leaders in the modern era of Rotary. Rotary International president during 2001, 2002. I think that's the right years. Rick is a legend. His incredible leadership and a persona, along with his wonderful wife, Sherry, who's here today, they've just been one of the greatest duets in Rotary history. And we really appreciate the fact that you're here today to be with us. You know, every time I'm around Rick, I'm inspired. And he's somebody that I've always looked up to. And I met a lot of people through Rotary. Rick's kind of always been one of my heroes because he's just the polished, wonderful guy. Makes me want to be a better person. And that's why he was such a great Rotary president. I'd like you to welcome Rick King.
You remind me a great deal of your father.
Really?
Brad, that was a wonderful commentary. We can report to the president of Rotary International that her representative, as we all knew, was outstanding. Thank you. I remember when I first met Cliff Dochterman. I was 16 years old. I was a freshman at the University of California at Berkeley. And somebody introduced this man to me who I thought looked funny and said he was an administrator on the California Berkeley campus. I listened to him talk for just a minute, and I was impressed that he would take the time to talk to a freshman who knew nobody and who didn't know anything. But that was the story of Cliff Dochterman in my life. For 60 years, I sat at his feet. I listened to his speeches. I heard that speech, "If I could be president again," hundreds of times, to the point where I just wanted to stand up and say, "Let him be president again." And and put the guy out of his misery. His talks, of course, were magnificent. I remember when I first learned a little bit about how important Cliff was. I went to some Rotary meeting. Somebody handed me a badge, and it had 2 ribbons hanging down. And they said, Rick, as soon as you get to be 9 ribbons, you're entitled to talk to God. When you're wearing 10 ribbons, you get to talk to Cliff Dochterman. Because Cliff Dochterman wore a lot of ribbons. I served on the Bay Area Council of the Boy Scouts of America with Cliff for a number of years. And Cliff received every award the Scouts give out. The Silver Beaver, the Silver Antelope, the Silver Buffalo, the Silver Cow, the Silver, on and on and on. He had so many animals on his chest. He was a great scouter, and he believed a great deal in the mission of Boy Scouting. I remember when I watched him one day giving a speech, and I thought to myself, it's amazing that he has spent a lifetime successfully battling anorexia. And he did it well. Cliff and I spent a lifetime roasting each other. It all started in Salt Lake City, where I was conducting a zone institute. And I asked Cliff to be the keynote speaker. He got up and he said, I want to thank Rick for the invitation. I'm a great fan of his singing, though I'm not as big a fan as he is. He said, he's the only guy I know who can take a Walmart suit and make it look expensive. And then he went on to say, and I can tell you that we've all heard his story about how Sherry made him jump on a trampoline. He fell off the trampoline and broke his hair. And I knew then that I was going to have to spend a great deal of time thinking about ways in my lawyer-like skill with courtroom experience over half a century, how to get even with this guy. I remember saying to him, I'm impressed with your haircut. Of course, he only had 2 hairs to cut. I love him. I will miss him. To me, he was bigger than life. A great friend. I never saw him or heard him say anything unkind about another human being. In thousands of hours sitting at his feet, listening to his sage counsel and advice. I've never known anyone quite like him. I saw him once. He stood a moment there. His eyes met mine and laid my spirit bare. He held my hand, then passed beyond my ken. But what I was, I will never be again. And I honestly thought in my lifetime that Cliff Dochterman would outlive me and outlive everybody else. I couldn't think of him as being mortal, as leaving us, is passing beyond the veil. And so I will miss him. And I loved him. I like his theme. Honk if you love Paul Harris. He told me once that he spent a lot of time dreaming that theme up. I don't know anybody who could look at an audience. So many times I would sit at the podium next to Cliff, and I would watch him looking out at the audience. And then he would pick up a napkin at his place, and he would make a note or two on the napkin. And then he would get up and get everybody roaring with some comment that he made simply because he'd seen somebody do something in the audience just a few seconds ago. He was a master craftsman of the ability to communicate. Cliff Dochterman always thanked me for my friendship. He always told me that he loved me. He said, I appreciate, Rick, what you've done for this or that. And I would think, how did I get so fortunate to meet Cliff Dochterman 60 years ago when I was 16 years of age? And where is he now? Often I have stood on the seashore looking out over the ocean at that line on the horizon where the sky meets the water. And a ship sails out, and people watch the ship sailing to the line on the horizon. And they say, she's gone. We can't see her anymore. Gone where? On the other side of the line, people are standing on another seashore. And they're saying, here she comes. Here she comes. There she goes. Here she comes. So I know that Cliff at this moment is speaking to some Rotary Club on the topic, if I could be president again. Cliff, thank you. And for every person whose life you've touched, God bless you, this day and always.
What's that they say that don't follow, the guy that follows Luke Gehrig is nobody ever remembers his name? Yeah, I guess I get to follow that. Rick, you're the best. You know, and you're one of the brightest stars in the history of Rotary, and your oratory, great job, speech major. Okay. Your speech was really good. You're the best. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about the comments from the family. This gets long and tedious. Feel free to sleep, doze, leave, whatever you'd like. But I have a few comments on behalf of the family. You know, the last 9 months for my father were particularly difficult. You know, we had just incredible support from the people at Moraga Royale. Several of you are here today. Thank you for everything you did for my father. His friends from Moraga Royale that are here, you know, he really was so disappointed when the COVID hit, because he really enjoyed the people up and down the hall and the people he interacted with. And he would talk to me on the phone and say, you know what? It's really terrible. It's like being on the outside looking into the candy store. I've got all these friends down the hall, but they won't let me out the door. And so it was always tough for him. But he was tough and resilient, and he wanted to contribute. One of his things that he said to me was right before he passed, he says, you know, I'm just so frustrated because I have 5 or 6 more years worth of work to do. I've still got stuff that needs to be done. And that just kind of broke my heart a bit, but, you know, we're going to miss him forever. Before I get into more thoughts about my father, I'd like to recognize my sister, Claudia Minuti, and Bill Minuti for everything that they did down the stretch. They were there all the time, battling it out. You guys, it was a Herculean effort that they made to make every day as comfortable as possible for him. And I just love you both so much, and I'm so appreciative to both of you for everything you did. You know, I could spend an hour talking about all kinds of stories about my father and his, you know, the selfless support of all these people. We have a couple others I'd like to recognize that made today possible. You know, Claudia and Bill have been working on this thing for, well, gosh, about 4 years. And it just seems that way, I guess. They've been working on this for so long. Cousin Ann Cozet, who made the displays and has been right there with us wherever. There she is, hiding back there. A lot of you know her as Toot, but she goes by Ann, and she's wonderful. Our friend Debbie Rossler that helped so much, and as well as our audio video guy, Tim, who probably is going to get an Academy Award for this presentation. So thank you, Tim. Yeah, just as a note, this will be available on YouTube. And also, the Moraga Rotary Club has got some kind of makeup sheets in the back. We've talked enough about Rotary. Okay, let's give you a little refresher on this guy. You know, his life started to quote what he would say, he was born at a young age in Cridersville, Ohio. And he would also say, of all the eulogies he's ever had, this is by far the most recent. You know, it's just amazing. He would say all these different things, and everybody would laugh. But he came from a humble beginning. He got involved in Rotary, and little did he know one day that he would ascend to the highest profile of a volunteer organization. To be the president of Rotary International was an incredible aspiration of his. And he wanted to do it not because he wanted some more ribbons. You know, Rick says the thing about the ribbons. I don't know how many of you knew there was a pink one in there. And if you look closely, it said, I'm a nobody, I just like ribbons. And he would often wear that at conventions just to see if anybody was paying attention. Well, he grew up in Ohio, went to Ohio Wesleyan, and, you know, I saw his transcript. It's obscene. I've never seen so many A's in my entire life. Just such an overachiever. And went on, and thank goodness he migrated to the University of California for his graduate studies, because it brought him here to the West Coast. And that's why we're all so happy. I would be frozen if I had had to grow up in Ohio. I'd be a Buckeye and gosh, nobody wants to do that. He had just an incredible I'm not using that word again. His style was just so unique because he wanted to communicate with originality, and he wanted you to know that he was genuine and everything that he wanted to say. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting, he said to me, because I went into the same kind of university work that he did, and he just said, you know, I may not have all this money to give major gifts, but I was given the ability to organize, to train, and develop and teach people how to activate, to go out and do something. And that is why I have to get up and go at 7 in the morning down to Fireball and speak to a Rotary Club. Or I'm going on a trip where I'm doing seven speeches in 4 days because I need to get out there and see the people. And you know, a lot of people have a problem with raising money. It's one of the most uncomfortable things that people do in a volunteer organization. But he wanted to empower people, treat people well, and put them into a position where they could make that ask. And his skills changed the face of Rotary. Now, we could go on and talk about all of his incredible accomplishments, but when it gets right down to it, he's the greatest I've ever seen at doing what he did. I'm just so lucky to have grown up and had him as my father for 60 years. He broke down the cultural barriers of philanthropy. You know, I remember it was a hot summer night, sitting there at this kitchen table there in Stockton, and the idea of Polio Plus was percolating among a few people that had a couple cocktails and actually believed the world was a good enough place where people would actually bind together and eradicate polio. And these crazy people were sitting around this table talking and talking and talking. And then, over the years, it happened. And because of Rotary International and because of the guys there at that table that night, we don't have polio in most places around the world. And it all is because of the work of so many people in this room that you did that and you activated that. You know, he was very comfortable with the kings and the queens. He loved going and seeing the foreign ministers, the presidents. He went to the UN. His speech at the UN was just such an important piece of Rotary history because it talked these governments into allowing Rotary to activate the Polio Plus program. Yeah, he's got a picture in his apartment of him in the Oval Office. He often wanted to Photoshop a different president in, but well, that's okay. His presidential theme of real happiness is helping others has really carried on for 30 years. It's tough to come up with a presidential theme, and his had legs, and it really has stayed on. I see so many people wearing those emblems today. I see it among people when I'm out at other Rotary events and things. People are still doing that. There are a couple other things that maybe you didn't know about him. One of his greatest accomplishments and one of the best things that ever happened to him, he was selected to be a Chautauqua speaker. And being a Chautauqua speaker is like going to the Super Bowl if you're an orator. Hey, I got it right that time. It was the greatest thing ever. And so what happens, they go to Chautauqua, New York. They bring in all these speakers every day throughout the summer, and people pay a lot of money to go and hear these speeches. He just happened to be there the day that he was sandwiched between a couple that just wished they had never seen him. Because Margaret Thatcher didn't look so good after Dad got up, and Mikhail Gorbachev had to follow him. So those two world leaders, their economies went in the dumper for years after they felt just so embarrassed by being outspoken by my dad. But that's another story. You know, he always loved his Warriors, his Cal football, the 49ers. I would often call him and talk to him while the Warrior game was going on. So we'd be on the phone for 2 hours. And, you know, Rick, you mentioned that you never heard him say an unkind word. You've never watched a game when the Warriors are turning the ball over 7 times in the first quarter. But it was really something. Our family continues to struggle with the reminders of my father. You know, boxing on Friday night. This guy would come home from battling the faculty at the university, and he'd come home, he'd have his dinner, wouldn't even take off the wingtips. He'd sit down in this chair, and he'd watch the Friday night fights from the Olympic Auditorium in Los Angeles, California. And he would love these fights every week. And I said, what brings you to these fights? He says, it's the stuff I can't do to the faculty. You know, he would do his crossword puzzles in ink. How many people do a crossword puzzle in ink? We called him Peter Perfect. And, you know, he was a high standard. His gardening outfit. Now, you would lose all Rotary respect over this. He would wear these double knit pants that were the inspiration for the Czechoslovakian brothers on Saturday Night Live, if you've ever seen them. And they would come kind of up, they were high, and that was him. He was not exactly the polished guy you saw all the time. He enjoyed rebuilding a cabin down in Santa Cruz, and the time down there, and he would have all these guests, and I see a few in the crowd that would come over there, and at 5 o'clock, the hammering stopped, and the wiring was done, and the cocktails started, and it was fun. And I see several here in the crowd that enjoyed those times. You know, he was the youngest Eagle Scout in the country. You've probably seen that on the show here. He really took pride. He was the youngest Eagle Scout in the history of the United States. But then again, it wasn't that long of a history at that point. But he was really excited about that. You know, my father we know about the Rotary, but he also was a great patriot. I don't know how many of you know that in 1971 he played running back for the Patriots. No, that's someone else. But in 1976, the Valley Forge Society selected him as one of the great patriots of our country. And he submitted his script, and they considered him one of the great orators of this century. All I know is if he would have been born 200 years earlier, Thomas Paine would be a guy working on Windows, because he would have been the guy that wrote Common Sense and all of that. He was the guy. You know, his sister's here. Sita is here today along with her son Luke. I'd also like to thank other members of the family here. We've got Linda and Steve Osplin. Sandy and Kelly are here today. We've got Eric is he still here? Cousin Eric was here. The whole family is out today, and we really appreciate that. You know, he explained that few people find love once, let alone twice, so we felt like he was a very lucky man. My mother passed away 34 years ago, and they were an incredible pair on the Rotary circuit. My mother wrote the book, So Your Husband's a Rotarian. Some of you have probably seen that. Many of you have seen the movie. But they were the great yin and yang of the circuit, and unfortunately, Mom passed away much too young. But she supported him and elevated him as a Rotarian and absolutely endorsed him being gone all the time. We didn't see my father that much growing up. And that's fine because I wasn't doing so well in school. And he was always out speaking. And my mother would say, you know what? He's doing something bigger than us tonight. And that's the kind of person you have to have supporting you at home. And she was wonderful. And my immediate family has moved to Minnesota. And they're watching today on the incredible streaming service. Also, we will be available on YouTube and most likely KPIX Channel 5 later tonight. My father really enjoyed my kids. My wife and he were really close, and she just loved him so much. My kids were just so excited about being around their grandfather. Their academic, he was excited about their academic performance, and they both moved on to graduate degrees now, and so he was so excited about that. But roughly 5 years after my mother passed away, and a year after his international presidency, Sue McCaffrey, there you are. Sue McCaffrey is the reason we're all here in Moraga today. She set him up on a blind date with the coolest lady of all time. And so she set him up, and the day before the thing, or the day of the thing, I took him to a Cal football game. And Cal was throwing the ball, USC was throwing the ball so much, the game took over 4.5 hours to complete. He was a nervous wreck. He hadn't been on a date since ice covered the earth. And so he met Mary Elena. Eventually they were married. You guys know a lot of the story, but they were a type A couple on steroids. I mean, they were just ready to run through every rotary wall. And he married somebody that was a great speaker, a great host, a great person at parties, a great networker, and somebody that did things that they said they were going to do. She was incredible. We all loved her so much, and here today we've got her daughters and the grandkids, and we've got Lena and her husband Chris, and we've got Karen and her husband Mark, and we got CJ. Alex isn't here, but Jenny's here, and Emily's here, and you know what? I hit the lottery when he married into your family. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Love you all so much. It's a powerhouse family, but it was a great adventure, those two together. I remember when Dad brought Mary Elena to Amarillo when I was running a minor league baseball team there. And, well, frankly, she needed to get a little sophistication. So we brought her to Amarillo, and so she's sitting down there at the ballpark, and she just really loved when the wind would change direction and from left field so she could smell the stockyards. She really got a great visit then. But I told her that night, the first night I met her, I said, you're going to add 15 to 20 years to his life. And she did. Without her, we wouldn't have had him so long. And she was so special, and I really appreciate that. He really loved the Moraga family, the extended Moraga family, the Moraga Rotary Club, and all of you here today. He loved making popcorn. Thanks for letting him make popcorn and Caesar salads and do all of that stuff. And thanks for taking him to the elephant sale at the TV station. That white elephant sale. Yeah, that white elephant. Yeah, the elephant sale is Circus, okay. He loved being part of the country club. He said to me, you know, I'm so grateful to be here, and I never thought I'd be a country club guy. This is just great. Then 3 years later, he says, you know what, we got to expand this place. And so he was part of that, as was mentioned earlier. And you know what? He didn't do it for anything other than to just be part of this community that he loved. And for every one of you that reached out and supported him, whether it was on the park for the handicapped park that you so graciously put together, or putting the elevator at the theater so that people could get upstairs that were physically challenged. You know, all these things were a part of him, and they made him feel real special. He gave so much of his life to higher education, and, you know, I'm going to stop in just a minute. But I wanted to recognize the time at Pacific. The University of Pacific, as he said, was family. And he went there with Stan McCaffrey, and Judy Chambers is here today, as well as Dorothy and Joe Sarah here from Stockton. It was all part of his life, and he wanted to give, and he was an extraordinary educator. He felt as though everything he did, whether it was in Rotary or the community or at the campus, led to education. But I will tell you one strange story about him. Unfortunately, there was a problem with physical plant at the university. And the people that ran physical plant needed to have a timeout. And he was assigned to take over physical plant. So he shows up to the physical plant meeting, and you've seen him. He doesn't look like he's a physical guy, but he shows up, and he's wearing his coveralls and his tool belt. And he shows up at the first meeting, and he says, I'm not a master carpenter. I'm not a master plumber. I'm not a master electrician. But all you journeymen, I can outdo any of you. So don't ever tell me anything that's not true. He was just too much. And so he went around, and he was physically doing physical plant work while being the vice president of the university. That's just him. He just wanted to always be involved. And he was so clever, and he had so many things that he could do, and we all miss all of those things about him. I still pick up the phone and dial him to ask him questions about stupid things like, how do you fix this, or how do you do that? But that's the way it is. Well, we've talked about a lot of different stories. People have come together today, and we've had a great time listening to Brad and Rick, then a few tidbits about the family. I would like to recognize, if I didn't recognize somebody, it's because I'm getting old. So I want to make sure that everybody in this room understands how much of a part of his life you were, how much he appreciated it, how much he would relay that to me about the relationships that he had and how important everybody was. He was a one-of-a-kind guy, and we can honor his legacy by continuing his work. And his work is to uplift people. It's to activate people to do better things, activate people to serve the world. And he would also expect us to say, real happiness is helping others. I really thank you for coming today. Maybe we have some more drinks and things, but let's have some fun and have some laughs. Thank you so much.